education and health sectors were spared from budget cuts during the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's midterm budget earlier this week. Instead, the minister confirmed an extra 24 billion rand in funding, with 74 billion rand over the medium term to fund the 7.5% public sector wage increase in the education and health sectors. To help us understand how budget cuts could impact education, I'm joined by Dr. Corrin Varady, who is the CEO of digital education company Idea. Thanks for making time for us, Dr. Varady. Let me first get your broad impressions and reaction to the announcement by the Finance Minister this past week when it comes to the education department.
Absolutely. I think, thank you for having me, first of all, but I think it's a pleasing announcement, because when the cost containment measures came out in the memo prior to the medium-term budget release, we all expected within the industry that there was going to be a huge downward pressure in terms of programs, professional development, e-learning, infrastructure, and wages. And so to see that our teachers are being recognized as our frontline workers, just like our healthcare workers were recognized during COVID, is really warming to me, and I think it's appropriate. It also means that we don't lose as many teachers to overseas countries as they're trying to recruit top South African teachers. So I think it's a really important point that the budget has made. But the interesting part around the budget is actually the infrastructure cuts. Because even though education has been spared, there's no doubt that there are going to be reductions and cost containment measures that are put in place around infrastructure. The building of schools, the deployment of technology, those big, large programs are going to have smaller budgets or smaller allocations. And in doing that, I think we have to take a moment and pause and use that as a reflection point, as an idea for us to say, how do we do things better? Is it just by building more schools and putting more things into schools? Or actually, can we do things a bit more efficiently and spend our budgets a bit more efficiently? And so even though education's been spared from the graveyard of the other budget sectors, I still think that there are areas that are going to have to be looked at from an efficiency point of view.
Yeah, I mean, the department is already facing a number of challenges, whether you talk about the shortage of teachers, inadequate infrastructure, low learner performance. So one wonders if we are still going to see the cost containment measures, what impact do you think that's going to have on the sector?
I mean, I think it comes down to how are the provinces also going to spend their allocation that are granted to them. And you know, I would urge, and I certainly hope that it isn't around the soft program side of things. So they're back on track, remediation programs, all of those post-COVID programs that we saw to try and bring students back into a national and global level of education. And certainly professional development. We can't be cutting our teachers' professional development programs. That's my greatest concern, because we then prioritise building more schools to meet the needs of a growing population, which I understand as well. But just building schools does not lead to outcomes in education. And you mentioned learner performance. You know, they're not directly related. Building a school and learner performance in this country, unfortunately, are not correlated, because just attending school will not give you a functional education necessarily. So I think what we need to see is that we're actually investing more of this budget into innovation, into new ideas. And that's not just innovation technology, but it's innovation in how we do things, how we rethink schooling, because there's no way that we're going to be able to build the right number of schools to meet the number of students that we've got coming up in the next 5 to 10 years. And so if that is going to be a budget pressure, my concern is we're going to cut other areas.
Yeah. Is there a link between, the insufficient budget that we often see in the education sector and, I suppose, the number of learners that are dropping out of school?
The private sector functions and the results are good because they have resources. And there's no doubt that there is a direct link between having a solid budget and being able to have resources that it enables a student. So that may be tutoring, it may be better books, it may be a digital program. There may be a whole range of resources that support that learner then into that education ecosystem, aside from going to a private school. But I think the challenge is if we start cutting those parts of the programs. So if we start saying that education just becomes a desk and a chair, a teacher and a classroom, it's not enough for us to then believe that in the next 5 to 10 years our matric results are going to change at all in the government sector. Private sector has something right because they have a pool of funds to be able to ensure that students have this abundant resource around them that allows them to remediate, revise, or extend themselves. Government school students don't have that. And that's my biggest concern, is that we're putting up these prefabricated schools, rapid build schools right now in urban areas, but we're not really thinking about how do we create quality across the board.
And how do you think we can do that? How do we create that quality?
I think we have to rethink what education means and what school means. Yeah. And that is not going to be a scary thing for teachers and their jobs, because I think we've seen that the budget and the industry recognizes the importance of teachers. But there's no doubt that we have teacher shortages, and we really need to rethink what is school? What does that really look like for us? So a public sector virtual education program is critical. It's urgent. It's been being worked on bits and pieces. Gauteng, Western Cape, even the National Department of Education was also working on it. But we never really fermented what does that look like? How do we make sure that we deliver something that's low cost, that's scalable, and that can go to students across the country on their mobile phones and help them with their education? So we haven't done that. We haven't invested in educational innovation. Every other sector is investing in the latest of med tech or fintech. But in education, we sit there just saying we're going to try and build some classrooms. So I think the only way that we're going to see ourselves from meeting that quality need is by building better, innovative products that can go out to lower income communities.
What do you think is stopping us from thinking innovatively around the future? And we're not just focusing on building more and more classrooms, because our government talks about the fourth industrial revolution. They talk about the advent of technology. Everything is being digitized now, and often when you hear them speak, you get a sense that they are understanding that we're moving into the future. In fact, the future is already here. But why do you think in the education sector the authorities are not adequately prepared?
I think the leadership understands and knows that we need to leap ahead, not just step ahead when it comes to digital transformation. I think change takes time, and I think it's a real challenge. And we're talking about an education system that's thousands of years old, that has been imported into South Africa, that all countries around the world adopt essentially. And so I think it takes time for us to then work out how do we engage technology with the sector. What's ultimately happened recently is that the fourth industrial revolution is available to a very privileged elite and higher income group of individuals and students. And so we're taking our top even further. That's fantastic. But what happens to the majority of our pyramid when I actually think technology services them better than anybody else? But I think it's seen as a nice to have. I think, when you're questioning if a school has windows and doors and bathrooms, you're not thinking about, do I need to be working on an innovation program simultaneously? So I think it just comes down to how do we prioritize our programs? And I am constantly working with provinces trying to say, I think both are equally important. It's not to say that we don't need to have school basic infrastructure, but we definitely need to be rethinking that technology, that transformation that needs to occur. Otherwise, we're going to have all these students who are not digitally literate, who are not functionally literate from their matric results and can't engage in the labour market. And so to me, then I wonder, well, what are we doing in the education sector? Because we're going to be surprised later on around unemployment figures. If we tackle that now, I think our cohort in about 10 years' time is going to see the benefits of that.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose if you're not prioritizing that leads to an increase in the inequality we already see in the education system.
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of people, and COVID was a perfect example of this, where everybody said, well, there's a digital divide. And so you don't understand because, there are families who don't have devices, gadgets, data. But all of those things are not insurmountable. The President, years ago, I think it was in his 2019 State of the Nation address, said we're going to purchase a device per student for every government student in the country and provide data hotspot. Now, we didn't execute on that program. COVID got in the way. But coming back to those principles of being able to reduce the digital divide is really important, because we start to democratize learning, and we start to say that really you can go to a government school, and going to a government school is not a bad thing, and you don't need to be choosing and looking at private sector as a competitor to government, which it currently is. Private sector should be gap filling and supporting government, but right now they're diametrically opposed with one another, because one is failing and one is succeeding.
Yeah, Dr. Corrin Varady, I appreciate your time.